Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. They used to say that Marissa Cole and Danielle Brooks were inseparable, the kind of girls who grew up sharing secrets on cracked front steps and dreaming about escaping the same tired streets. They met as children in Riverton Heights, a worn-down neighborhood on the east side of Fairmont City, Ohio, where families struggled, tempers ran hot, and survival often mattered more than stability. From the outside, their friendship looked unbreakable. From the inside, it was built on imbalance, denial, and a trust that would one day turn fatal. Marissa Cole had always been difficult to define. Even as a child, she carried a restless energy that unsettled people around her. Teachers described her as volatile. Neighbors remembered shouting matches that echoed through thin apartment walls. Her mother, Linda Cole, later admitted that raising Marissa felt like living with a storm that could turn violent without warning. There were incidents that should have raised alarms. Fires started during arguments, threats spoken casually, explosions of rage followed by long stretches of eerie calm. Danielle Brooks saw a different version of Marissa. To her, Marissa was fierce, loyal, protective, someone who would fight for you when no one else would. Danielle grew up craving that kind of loyalty. Her own life had little structure. By 16, she was already a mother, holding her first son, Marcus, while trying to finish school. Responsibility arrived early and stayed heavy. Money was scarce, support was inconsistent, mistakes were costly. Danielle's path was never easy, but it was steady. She loved her children deeply, even when her decisions were questioned. When child services intervened after a discipline incident involving her oldest son, Danielle did not run or lash out. She complied. She attended parenting classes. She endured judgment and whispers. She fought. Eventually, she regained custody, determined to prove she was more than a young mother defined by one mistake. Marissa's life moved in the opposite direction. She also became a mother young, but motherhood did not soften her edges. When authorities removed her infant daughter due to severe neglect, the details were alarming enough to shock even seasoned caseworkers. The child survived, but the consequences followed Marissa for years. For a time, her children were placed elsewhere, and Marissa drifted deeper into instability. In a decision that would later be questioned heavily, the system gave Marissa another chance. Charges were dropped, custody was restored. Officials concluded she no longer posed a risk. To them, it was a closed file. To those who knew her history, it felt unfinished. By her early 20s, Marissa was frequently in trouble. Theft charges, fraud, short jail stays, unstable relationships. Yet somehow she maintained the image of someone just down on her luck, misunderstood, trying to get back on her feet. Danielle believed that version completely. She trusted Marissa with her children, trusted her with her home, trusted her with her life. By 2006, Danielle was pregnant again. This time she was hopeful. She talked about baby names, about moving to a quieter neighborhood, about finally feeling like things were falling into place. She was glowing in a way her family had not seen before. Marissa stayed close, offering help, babysitting, rides. To everyone else, it looked like friendship. No one saw the envy building beneath the surface. Around that same time, Marissa began telling people she was pregnant too. The story was vague, details shifted. Some days she claimed to be far along, other days she avoided the topic altogether. Her boyfriend, Evan Price, believed her. He worked out of state and wanted to come home, and the pregnancy gave him a reason to stay emotionally tied. Marissa leaned into the lie. She bought baby clothes, rearranged furniture, played the role convincingly. On September 15th, Marissa made a frantic call to emergency services. Her voice trembled as she claimed she had suffered a miscarriage at a public park. First responders arrived to find her holding a newborn girl who was not breathing. She appeared distraught, sobbing uncontrollably. The scene was chaotic, confusing, and emotionally charged. She was taken to the hospital. Doctors quickly noticed irregularities. Marissa refused a medical examination. Her explanations shifted. At one point, she suggested an assault. Moments later, she denied it. Medical staff were uneasy, but without cooperation, their options were limited. The infant was taken for examination. Marissa left the hospital shortly afterward, leaving the baby behind. Despite the unanswered questions, Marissa arranged a funeral. The service was delayed without explanation. Attendance was sparse. Evan stood by her side, grieving a child he believed was his. The entire event felt off, but no one could articulate why. At the same time, something far more troubling was unfolding. Danielle Brooks had not been seen or heard from in days. Her family began calling, texting, checking social media. Nothing. Danielle never went silent like that. She was always reachable, always checking in. Panic grew quickly. Friends searched her neighborhood. Her parents went to her apartment. It was empty. After the funeral, Evan confronted Marissa privately. During their conversation, she said something that froze him in place, a sentence so shocking that he later struggled to repeat it out loud. He left immediately and contacted police. What followed was a race against time. Authorities launched a missing person investigation for Danielle. Flyers went up. Officers canvassed the area. 6 days later, a patrol unit discovered Danielle's body in a vacant field not far from Marissa's home. The evidence made it clear that this was not an accident, nor a random act of violence. Marissa Cole was arrested that night. In custody, she spoke calmly, too calmly. She described inviting Danielle over days earlier. She talked about an argument, about losing control, about actions that could never be undone. Investigators soon realized what they were uncovering went far beyond the death of one woman. Danielle's 3 children were missing. At first, Marissa claimed she had dropped them off. Then she changed her story. The search intensified. Fear spread through Fairmont City. Police searched Danielle's apartment, hoping desperately to find the children alive. They did not. The discovery that followed would haunt everyone involved for years. By the end of that week, the city was in shock. A friendship that had lasted since childhood had ended in the destruction of an entire family. Vigils filled the streets. Hundreds gathered, holding candles, asking the same question over and over. How could this happen? As Marissa sat alone in a holding cell, the full weight of her actions began to surface publicly. But understanding what she had done did not explain why, and the legal system was only just beginning to grapple with the magnitude of the case. That question, the why, would follow everyone into the courtroom, and it would never be fully answered. The arrest of Marissa Cole did not bring relief. If anything, it deepened the dread that had already settled over Fairmont City. Detectives quickly realized that Danielle Brooks' death was only one layer of something far more disturbing. As investigators began to piece together timelines, phone records, and witness statements, the shape of a calculated deception started to emerge. Marissa's initial interview was calm, almost rehearsed. She spoke about Danielle in fragments, sometimes affectionately, sometimes with resentment slipping through. She claimed they argued about money, about childcare, about old grudges that never quite healed. According to Marissa, the argument escalated. She said she lost control. She insisted she never meant for anyone to die. The words sounded hollow, stripped of emotion. Detectives had heard similar statements before, and they rarely told the full story. While Marissa sat in custody, officers turned their focus to Danielle's missing children. 3 young lives had seemingly vanished without a trace. The urgency shifted from investigation to rescue. Patrol units canvassed nearby neighborhoods. Officers knocked on doors through the night. Alerts were issued. For a brief, desperate window, there was still hope. That hope began to fade when investigators searched Danielle's apartment more thoroughly. The place was unnaturally quiet. Toys were missing. Clothes were gone. No signs of a hurried departure. No notes. No indication Danielle had planned to leave town. To seasoned detectives, it felt staged, as if someone had tried to erase the presence of children altogether. Attention returned to Marissa's movements in the days before and after Danielle disappeared. Surveillance footage from convenience stores showed Marissa driving Danielle's car alone. Witnesses recalled seeing her with children who appeared withdrawn, unusually silent. One clerk remembered Marissa snapping at them to keep their heads down. At the time, it had seemed like an impatient mother having a bad day. In hindsight, it felt chilling. Investigators questioned Evan Price again. This time, the conversation was different. He was no longer defending Marissa. He was shaken, struggling with guilt. He admitted that her pregnancy had never made sense. She avoided doctor visits. She refused ultrasounds. When he asked questions, she accused him of doubting her. He had wanted to believe her so badly that he ignored his instincts. Evan also shared something else. Days before the supposed miscarriage, Marissa had asked him what it felt like to lose a child. The question struck him as odd at the time, but now it felt sinister. Detectives noted it carefully. As evidence mounted, forensic analysts began examining the infant Marissa had claimed as her own. The results were conclusive. The infant was Danielle's. There was no biological link to Marissa whatsoever. The story Marissa had presented to emergency responders collapsed entirely under scientific scrutiny. Police confronted Marissa with the findings. This time, her composure cracked. Her responses became defensive, erratic. She accused Danielle of betrayal, claimed Danielle had ruined everything. The words poured out in angry bursts. Investigators listened quietly, letting the silence stretch. Eventually, Marissa spoke the truth, or at least part of it. She admitted she had wanted a baby more than anything. She said she felt the world owed her one. Watching Danielle prepare for another child, seeing the support she received, triggered something dark and consuming. In Marissa's mind, the baby represented a chance to start over, to be loved, to fix what had always been broken inside her. The plan, investigators learned, had not been spontaneous. It had been forming for months. Marissa had studied Danielle's routines. She knew when she was vulnerable, when she was alone, when her guard was down. The friendship had been a doorway, and Danielle never suspected it could lead to her destruction. When Marissa invited her over under the guise of helping with baby preparations, Danielle didn't hesitate. She trusted her. That trust cost her everything. As the interrogation continued, Marissa's story shifted again. She alternated between minimizing her actions and justifying them. She spoke of envy, abandonment, rage. She described moments where she felt disconnected, watching herself act without restraint. Psychologists later described these statements as attempts to distance herself from responsibility, but the intent behind her actions remained undeniable. Still, one question remained unanswered. Where were the children? Days passed without answers. The public grew restless. Media coverage intensified. Danielle's parents appeared on television, pleading for information, clinging to the smallest chance that their grandchildren might still be alive. Vigils multiplied across the city. Candles burned through the night. Then, a break came from an unexpected source. A sanitation worker reported something unusual at an abandoned property scheduled for demolition. Investigators arrived and began searching the area. What they found confirmed the worst fears of everyone involved. The children had not survived. The announcement devastated Fairmont City. Grief turned to outrage. People demanded to know how someone with Marissa's history had been allowed back into the lives of children at all. Questions flooded social services, law enforcement, the courts. Systems meant to protect had failed catastrophically. Marissa was formally charged with multiple counts of murder. The list of charges grew longer with each discovery. Prosecutors prepared for a case that would test the limits of even seasoned professionals. The sheer scope of the crime was staggering. As Marissa awaited trial, psychological evaluations painted a bleak picture. Experts described a pattern of manipulation, fixation, and entitlement. They emphasized that while mental health issues were present, Marissa understood her actions. She knew right from wrong. She planned. She concealed. Those facts mattered. Evan Price struggled in the aftermath.
He publicly apologized to Danielle's family, acknowledging that his silence and trust in Marissa had allowed the lie to persist. His grief was complicated by guilt, by the realization that he had mourned a child who was never his, while ignoring the warning signs that could have saved others. For Danielle's family, there was no closure, only an aching absence. They buried their daughter and grandchildren in a single service that drew hundreds. Photographs of smiling faces lined the walls of the church. Friends shared stories of Danielle's warmth, her resilience, her dreams for her children. The contrast between the life she had built and the way it ended was unbearable. As the trial approached, prosecutors faced a decision. They could pursue the death penalty, a move that would extend the legal process for years, or they could seek multiple life sentences without parole. After consulting with Danielle's family, they chose the latter. The family wanted certainty. They wanted Marissa never to walk free again. The courtroom would soon become the final stage where truth, accountability, and grief collided. But long before the first witness took the stand, one thing was already clear. This was not a story of a momentary lapse or a tragic misunderstanding. It was the story of a friendship weaponized, of envy allowed to rot into violence, and of a warning that had gone unheeded until it was far too late. And for Fairmont City, the scars would remain long after the headlines faded. The trial of Marissa Cole began under an intense spotlight. By the time jury selection started, the case had already become one of the most talked about crimes in state history. Reporters packed the courthouse steps each morning. Satellite vans lined the streets. Inside, however, the atmosphere was heavy and subdued, as if everyone understood they were about to relive something that could never truly be processed or understood. Marissa entered the courtroom without expression. She wore plain clothing, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her posture calm to the point of eeriness. There was no visible remorse, no outward fear. For Danielle Brooks' family, seeing her like that was almost unbearable. They had come not for spectacle, but for accountability. They wanted answers, even if those answers would only deepen their pain. Prosecutors opened by laying out the timeline. They spoke slowly, deliberately, guiding the jury through the long friendship between the two women. They emphasized trust, dependence, shared history. This was not a random act of violence. It was betrayal rooted in familiarity. According to the state, Marissa exploited every weakness Danielle had. She knew her financial struggles, her exhaustion, her instinct to lean on friends rather than question them. Witnesses followed one by one. Neighbors described seeing Marissa at Danielle's apartment after Danielle had already gone missing. Store clerks recalled the strange behavior of the children, quiet and withdrawn. Medical experts explained how the infant Marissa presented at the hospital could not have been hers. Social workers testified about Marissa's past, her pattern of instability, and the decisions that had allowed her continued access to vulnerable families. The most difficult testimony came from forensic investigators. They avoided unnecessary detail, but the facts alone were devastating. Danielle had been alive during the attack. Her children had trusted the person who ended their lives. Each sentence landed like a weight in the room. Several jurors wiped away tears. Danielle's mother had to leave the courtroom more than once. Marissa's defense did not deny the deaths. Instead, they focused on her mental health. Her attorney argued that Marissa had lived her entire life with untreated psychological disorders. She had experienced hallucinations, emotional detachment, and impaired judgment. The defense painted her as someone who did not fully grasp the consequences of her actions at the time they occurred. Psychiatrists testified for both sides. One expert stated that Marissa suffered from multiple disorders, but still understood the difference between right and wrong. Another suggested her thinking had been distorted by obsession and fear. The jury listened, but the prosecution returned again and again to one key point. Planning requires awareness. Preparation requires intent. Marissa had bought supplies in advance. She had created a false pregnancy. She had lied consistently and convincingly. These were not the actions of someone acting without understanding. Evan Price also took the stand. His testimony was brief but painful. He admitted his failures openly. He spoke about the lies he believed, the questions he ignored, the moment Marissa revealed the truth to him too casually for it to be accidental. His voice broke when he described calling the police. He said he knew in that instant that whatever love he thought existed between them had been an illusion. As the trial drew toward its conclusion, the courtroom felt drained. There was no drama left, no surprises, only the reality of what had happened and the knowledge that no verdict could undo it. Marissa chose not to testify. When given the opportunity to speak, she declined. The silence felt louder than any confession. Some believed it was strategic. Others believed she simply had nothing left to say. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. It took less than 2 days. The verdict was read in a packed courtroom. Guilty on all counts. There was no reaction from Marissa. She stared straight ahead, unmoving. Danielle's family held one another tightly, releasing breaths they felt they had been holding for years. Justice, in its legal sense, had been served, but the emotional cost remained immeasurable. During sentencing, the judge spoke at length. He addressed the severity of the crimes, the calculated nature of the actions, and the irreversible harm caused. He acknowledged Marissa's mental health struggles, but made it clear they did not excuse her behavior. She was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. As she was led out of the courtroom, Marissa did not look back. In the years that followed, the case refused to fade quietly into history. Appeals were filed, focusing largely on whether Marissa's mental condition had been properly considered before her initial confession and plea. Some legal experts argued her representation had failed her. Others insisted the outcome would have been the same regardless. Each appeal reopened old wounds for Danielle's family, forcing them to relive the details again and again. Public opinion remained divided. Some viewed Marissa as a monster beyond redemption. Others saw her as a deeply broken individual failed by every system meant to intervene early. The debate raised uncomfortable questions about mental health care, child welfare, and how warning signs are often overlooked until tragedy strikes. Danielle Brooks became more than a victim. Her story was used in training sessions for social workers, law enforcement, and healthcare professionals. Her name was spoken in discussions about trust, boundaries, and the danger of assuming familiarity equals safety. Her children were remembered in community programs aimed at supporting at-risk families. Evan Price left the state not long after the trial. He spoke publicly only once more, during a victim impact forum where he urged people to trust their instincts and report concerns even when it feels uncomfortable. He said silence can be just as destructive as violence. Marissa Cole remains incarcerated, her appeals still winding through the courts. Some rulings have allowed limited reviews of her mental health claims, but none have altered her sentence. She spends her days largely isolated, her name rarely spoken except in legal documents and academic discussions about criminal psychology. For Danielle's family, life moved forward in fragments. Birthdays passed without children to celebrate. Holidays felt hollow. Yet they found purpose in advocacy, in pushing for reforms, in making sure others might be spared a similar fate. They spoke often about Danielle's kindness, her resilience, her love for her children. They refused to let the story end with violence alone. In the end, this was not just a story about a crime. It was a story about trust misused, about warning signs ignored, and about how quickly ordinary lives can collapse when darkness is allowed to grow unchecked.
It serves as a reminder that the most dangerous betrayals often come not from strangers, but from those we believe we know best. And while the legal case may one day conclude fully, the echoes of what happened in Fairmont City will remain, carried quietly by those who survived and by the memories of those who did not. He was born on April 17, 1933, in the industrial town of Falkenried, a place in northern Germany that carried the scars of hardship even before war arrived. His name was Leonhard Weiss, the sixth of 9 children in a family that never seemed to have enough of anything except tension. The Weiss household was cramped, loud, and unforgiving. Food was scarce, patience even scarcer. Leonhard's father worked long shifts at a steel factory and returned home exhausted, angry, and quick to lash out. Discipline in the Weiss home was not guidance, but fear. Voices were raised more often than comfort was offered, and mistakes were punished harshly. Leonhard's mother, Helene, was quiet and withdrawn. She endured her husband's temper and silence and rarely intervened when the children were shouted down or struck. Survival, not nurturing, defined her days. From an early age, Leonhard stood apart from his siblings. He struggled with basic tasks other children learned easily. Reading frustrated him. Numbers confused him. Teachers labeled him slow, and classmates were far less polite. They mocked his clumsiness, his vacant stares, the way he often failed to follow simple instructions. Over time, ridicule became routine, and Leonhard learned to retreat inward, avoiding attention whenever possible. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, the family's fragile stability collapsed entirely. Rationing tightened, bombings became a constant fear. Hunger followed them like a shadow. Leonhard, already small for his age, grew thinner and weaker. There were days when he ate nothing at all. The adults were too consumed by survival to notice his isolation deepening. In 1943, his father was conscripted into the military. For Helene, it meant another layer of uncertainty. For Leonhard, it brought a quiet, unspoken relief. The house became calmer without his father's presence. There were fewer outbursts, fewer nights spent bracing for anger. Yet the absence did not bring warmth. It only created emptiness. By the time the war ended in 1945, Falkenried was a town of ruins and weary people. Leonhard was 12 years old, but emotionally and socially he lagged far behind. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. He had no close friends. Other children avoided him, sensing something unsettling in his silence. Neighbors dismissed him as odd, a boy who wandered alone and watched too much. His mother worked endlessly to keep the family afloat, leaving Leonhard largely unsupervised. No one noticed how much time he spent roaming abandoned lots and wooded edges near the town. It was there that his inner world began to take a darker shape. At first, his curiosity focused on animals, stray cats, birds with injured wings, creatures already vulnerable. He watched them closely, not with affection, but with fascination. One winter afternoon, he caught a stray animal and held it until it stopped moving. Instead of panic or guilt, he felt something unfamiliar and powerful. For the first time, he felt in control. That feeling stayed with him. As months passed, these moments became more frequent. Leonhard did not speak of them. He did not seem to understand they were wrong. In his mind, they were private experiments, moments where the world finally made sense. The chaos of his childhood, the hunger, the humiliation, all faded when he focused on absolute control. By his mid-teens, his thoughts began to shift in unsettling ways. He noticed people more closely now, especially those who appeared weaker or alone.
his imagination filled with disturbing fantasies that frightened him even as they drew him in. At night, he lay awake, replaying imagined scenarios in his mind, testing boundaries he had not yet crossed. In 1950, at 17, Leonhard left school for good. There was no argument. Teachers knew he would never keep up. His family needed money, and he was sent to do manual labor wherever work could be found. The jobs were simple, repetitive, and isolating. They suited him. He spoke little, worked steadily, and returned home unnoticed. When his mother died 5 years later, Leonhard was 22. Her death barely registered publicly. There was no extended mourning, no long reflection, but privately it marked a turning point. She had been the last thin thread connecting him to restraint. With her gone, no one watched him, questioned him, or expected anything from him. He began to observe people the way he once observed animals. He learned patterns, who walked alone, who took the same routes every day, who seemed distracted or trusting. He was patient. He understood instinctively that impulsiveness would expose him. Whatever he planned would require the right moment. That moment came in February 1955 in a wooded area near the town of Lindenhof, not far from Falkenried. A young woman named Clara Newman, 19 years old, was walking alone along a quiet path. Leonhard noticed her from a distance and followed slowly, rehearsing his approach in his mind. He spoke to her casually, asking for directions. She paused, turned towards him, and that brief moment of attention was enough. What happened next unfolded quickly and violently, leaving no opportunity for intervention. Leonhard fled the scene afterward, shaken but consumed by a realization that would define the rest of his life. The discovery of Clara's body sent shockwaves through the area. Police searched for suspects, questioned locals, and eventually arrested another man based on circumstantial evidence. Leonhard watched from a distance as the investigation unfolded, saying nothing, revealing nothing. When the wrong man was convicted and later died in custody, Leonhard felt no guilt, only relief. The success of his silence emboldened him. The following year, in a rural field near the village of Ekenmoor, a 12-year-old girl named Sophie Lang disappeared while playing alone. Her body was found the next day. The similarities between the cases troubled investigators, but without clear evidence, the pattern went unresolved. Leonhard continued his life as if untouched by the tragedy around him. He moved from town to town, blending into new environments, presenting himself as quiet, harmless, even helpful. Children trusted him. Neighbors waved politely. No one saw danger in the thin man with the vacant smile. By the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Leonhard Weiss had become something far more dangerous than anyone suspected. The boy, shaped by war, neglect, and isolation, had grown into a predator who understood patience, concealment, and the terrifying advantage of being underestimated. And this was only the beginning. Leonhard Weiss learned quickly that invisibility was his greatest shield. After the deaths near Falkenried and Eichenmoor, fear rippled through nearby towns, but it never reached him directly. People spoke in whispers about danger, about strangers, about locking doors earlier at night. Leonhard listened, nodded along when spoken to, and went back to his routines. No one suspected the quiet laborer who kept his head down and avoided attention. In 1957, he relocated again, this time to a small lakeside town called Bergtal. It was peaceful, the kind of place where neighbors trusted one another and children played freely near the water. Leonhard found work unloading shipments at a local warehouse. The job required little conversation and offered long stretches of solitude.
He rented a modest room in a boarding house and became, in the eyes of others, forgettable. But beneath that surface, his inner world was growing darker and more structured. What had once felt impulsive now became methodical. He studied people the way a craftsman studies tools. He noted routines, habits, and weaknesses. His thoughts were no longer chaotic, they were organized, deliberate, and increasingly detached from any sense of morality. Over the next several years, disappearances and unexplained deaths occurred across different regions. The details varied, but the underlying pattern remained. Victims were often alone, often vulnerable, and the circumstances were always just ambiguous enough to prevent clear conclusions. Investigators treated each case as isolated. There was no centralized system, no shared database, no reason to connect the dots across counties and years. Leonhard exploited that gap. By the early 1960s, he had learned how to move without drawing attention. He changed addresses frequently. He avoided deep relationships. When questioned casually, he gave simple, unremarkable answers. He had learned how to mirror normal behavior just enough to pass unnoticed. In 1964, he settled in Hohenfeld, a quiet town surrounded by forest and farmland. There, something shifted. For the first time, Leonhard made an effort to appear friendly. He spoke more. He offered small favors. He helped neighbors carry groceries or fix minor household issues. Children especially seemed drawn to him. They saw him as harmless, even kind. Adults noticed nothing alarming. If anything, they described him as a bit odd but well-meaning. Someone you wouldn't invite for dinner, perhaps, but not someone you would fear. In June of 1967, an elderly woman named Elsa Ritter was found dead near a walking path by the riverbank. She had been known to take daily walks, greeting passers-by along the way. Her death shocked the town. Rumors spread quickly, but again there was no suspect. Leonhard attended the local vigil, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. He bowed his head like everyone else. After that, the frequency of the killings increased. The restraint that had once defined his behavior began to weaken. He no longer waited years between acts. Whatever barrier had held him back was eroding. The sense of control he craved was no longer enough. He wanted repetition. He wanted certainty. Between 1959 and 1970, authorities would later estimate that at least a dozen victims fell within the same pattern. Some were never formally connected to Leonhard during his lifetime. Others were misclassified or quietly forgotten. Families mourned without answers. Towns moved on. Leonhard, meanwhile, adapted. He learned how to dispose of evidence more effectively. He learned which areas were rarely patrolled and which rivers carried debris far from their source. His actions became colder, stripped of even the distorted emotions that once accompanied them. What remained was habit. Then, abruptly, the killings stopped. From 1970 onward, there were no known incidents connected to the pattern investigators would later attribute to Leonhard. For 6 years, he lived quietly in Dornfeld, a dense residential district in the city of Obermark. He worked odd jobs, paid his rent on time, and rarely spoke to anyone beyond basic necessities. Some speculated later that age, illness, or fear had restrained him. Others believed he was simply waiting. In the summer of 1976, that silence broke. On July 3rd, a 4-year-old girl named Lena Hartman disappeared from a small playground near her apartment complex in Obermark. She had been playing within sight of nearby buildings. Her disappearance was immediate and alarming. Residents searched frantically. Parents clutched their children close. Police arrived within hours. Leonhard lived only a short distance away. This time he did not act in public. Instead, he used familiarity. He was known in the building. He had been seen before.
When questioned later, some residents recalled seeing him nearby that afternoon, but at the time it meant nothing. That evening, police launched a neighborhood-wide search. Officers knocked on doors, asking residents if they had seen Lena. Leonhard answered calmly when they reached his apartment. He said he had been home all day. His demeanor was relaxed, cooperative. There was nothing overtly suspicious. The following morning, an unrelated complaint changed everything. Residents in Leonhard's building reported a severe plumbing issue. Wastewater was backing up through shared pipes, creating an unbearable odor. A maintenance worker was sent to investigate. When he accessed the drainage system, he discovered material that did not belong there. Authorities were notified immediately. Forensic teams confirmed that the remains recovered from the pipes belonged to a young child. The timeline narrowed quickly. Investigators returned to the apartment building with renewed urgency. This time, their approach was different. When officers knocked on Leonhard's door again, he opened it without hesitation. He did not resist when they asked to enter. Inside, the apartment was sparsely furnished, but something felt wrong immediately. The air was heavy. The smell was unmistakable. Further inspection left no doubt. Leonhard Weiss was arrested on the spot. During questioning, his composure never cracked. He spoke in flat, emotionless sentences. When asked about Lena, he answered directly. When asked why, he offered explanations that chilled everyone in the room. There was no anger, no remorse, only justification. As investigators expanded their inquiry, they revisited decades-old cases across multiple regions. Patterns emerged with horrifying clarity. The timelines aligned, the methods matched. Witness descriptions that once seemed vague suddenly made sense. Searches of Leonhard's former residences uncovered disturbing discoveries. In one location, officers found concealed remains beneath floorboards. In another, they uncovered items linked to missing persons cases long considered unsolvable. Each discovery deepened the scope of what had gone unnoticed for so long. Psychologists brought in to evaluate Leonhard struggled to categorize him. He did not fit common profiles. He did not act out of rage or impulse. He did not seek attention. He did not express pleasure in recounting his actions. He described them as practical, even necessary. One expert summarized it bluntly. Leonhard did not see people as people. By the time the investigation concluded, authorities officially connected him to 14 murders. Privately, many believed the true number was higher. Some cases would never be conclusively resolved. Time had erased too much. As news spread, public reaction was swift and intense. People demanded answers. How could someone like this exist among them for decades? How could so many warning signs be missed? The truth was uncomfortable. Leonhard Weiss had not hidden in shadows. He had lived openly, protected by assumptions, by fragmented systems, and by the human tendency to overlook what feels inconvenient or unlikely. And now, as he sat in a prison cell awaiting trial, the full weight of his history was finally catching up to him. But justice, long delayed, was still only beginning. By the time dawn arrived, the town felt like it had aged overnight. The rain had stopped, but everything looked washed thin, as if the truth had drained the color from the streets. People woke to police cars still parked where they had been the night before, yellow tape fluttering like tired flags, and a silence that felt heavier than noise. Word had already spread. Not the full story, never the full story, but enough. The mystery that had lived in whispers for years had finally broken open. Inside the station, the mood was subdued. No one celebrated. Cases like this never ended cleanly. The lead investigator sat alone with a paper cup of cold coffee, reading through the final statement again. It was all there now, the missing pieces, the contradictions that once seemed small, the overlooked details that only made sense when placed together. What had looked like coincidence was pattern. What had looked like bad luck was design. The suspect had talked, not out of guilt or remorse, but exhaustion. Years of carrying a secret had worn them down in ways no prison sentence ever could. When they finally spoke, it was not dramatic, no shouting, no breakdown, just a flat voice listing events as if reading from a grocery list. That calm was what unsettled everyone most. They explained how it started, not with violence, but with opportunity. A door left unlocked, a routine no one questioned, a moment where they realized how invisible they were to the people around them. That realization had planted a dangerous idea, one that grew slowly, fed by resentment and the belief that they were owed something by a world that had ignored them. The crime itself had not gone the way they planned. It never does. Small mistakes were made, a sound at the wrong time, a witness they assumed would forget, an object left behind in a rush. At the time, they believed they had gotten away with it. The town had moved on, or at least pretended to. But time has a way of circling back. Memories resurface, technology improves, and people who once stayed quiet find their voices. What finally cracked the case was not a single piece of evidence, but persistence. A new investigator, one who had grown up hearing the story as a cautionary tale, refused to accept the old conclusions. They read every file, listened to every interview, and noticed what others had missed. The timeline did not quite line up. One statement contradicted another in a subtle but important way. A detail dismissed years ago suddenly mattered. When the arrest was made, it happened quietly. No sirens, no media waiting outside, just a knock on a door and a short walk to a car. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. It is unsettling to realize that someone you have waved to for years carries a darkness you never saw. As the legal process moved forward, the town struggled with what came next. Some wanted closure, others wanted explanations, and a few preferred not to know anything more. The victim's family attended every hearing, sitting close together, hands clasped. Justice did not bring back what they had lost, but it did give shape to their grief. The uncertainty, which had been its own kind of torment, was finally gone. The suspects showed little emotion during the trial. They listened, nodded occasionally, corrected small factual errors when witnesses spoke. It was not defiance, it was detachment. When the verdict was read, there was no visible reaction, just a slow blink as if acknowledging something inevitable. Sentencing followed soon after. The judge spoke of accountability, of harm that ripples outward, touching lives in ways the perpetrator can never fully understand. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked the same questions they always do. How did this happen? Could it have been prevented? Are we safe now? No one had simple answers. Crime stories rarely end with neat lessons. They leave behind reminders instead. That evil does not always look like a monster, that silence can protect the wrong people, that paying attention matters. In the weeks that followed, life resumed its routines. Kids went back to school, shops opened on time, the tape came down, but something had shifted. People greeted each other more deliberately. Doors were locked a little earlier at night. The story became part of the town's identity, retold carefully, with emphasis on what had been learned rather than what had been lost. The investigator who solved the case declined interviews after the trial. They said the work was never about recognition. It was about responsibility, about speaking for those who no longer could. On their desk sat the original case file, now closed, marked with dates that spanned decades. They kept it there as a reminder, not of success, but of patience. For the victim's family, healing came slowly. Some days were easier than others. Anniversaries still hurt. Certain places still triggered memories. But there was also a quiet strength in knowing the truth, in knowing that the story had an ending, even if it was not the one they would have chosen. Years from now, newcomers to the town might hear the story in fragments, a conversation at a diner, a passing comment during a local tour. They might nod, feel a brief chill, and move on, but for those who lived it, the lesson remains close, that justice can be delayed, but it should never be abandoned, that ordinary places can hold extraordinary secrets, and that the final chapter, when it comes, is not about revenge or victory, but about finally seeing the whole picture clearly. And with that clarity, the town learned to live again, not forgetting what happened, but no longer trapped by it. The case was closed, the truth was spoken, and the long night at last gave way to morning.